I've talked a lot about the popularity of certain cameras and camera brands and why that matters when it comes to production. Let's say there's a team of professionals who are working and they're all shooting Sony. It's certainly a lot easier to join and work with that team if you also have Sony equipment. If it's Canon is the popular brand in the market that you're in, and there's a lot of companies working with Canon equipment, if you have Canon, it's going to be a lot easier to fit in. And so at a certain point, popularity matters quite a bit in terms of making your choices and what you want to buy, what you want to invest in as it's going to fit with everyone else around you. But there's also people who take the approach of, well, it's not a popularity contest, use the right tool for the job. And of course, that's true. I don't know why I have to say it every time. It should be pretty obvious that I'm a Lumix shooter, even though that is one of the least popular camera brands when it comes to sales. And it doesn't matter, but it is true. You can look up the camera rankings and who's selling the most, who's making the most money. Canon and Sony are at the top. You still got Nikon up there. And then there's Panasonic, Lumix, and Fuji's around there somewhere. And Olympus is still there, and Blackmagic. And you can find the rankings and you can make of that what you will. It ultimately shouldn't really affect your decision making. Just because Canon is number one doesn't mean that you should pick Canon because Canon's the best. That's not what popularity means. Often the inverse is true. Whoever's most popular is often not the best. And I would personally say that I prefer the Lumix cameras, but it is a consideration to make of how do you fit in the production environment around you. If you're working in Hollywood, that has its own set of brands and equipment that you need to be familiar with. Whereas if maybe you're in Atlanta, maybe you're in New York, maybe you're in the Midwest somewhere, it doesn't really matter, but you kind of have to be wise to what's happening around you to make sure that you're not, leaving yourself out by the choices that you're making. If you want to be an independent creator and just work for yourself, that's probably the best case scenario because you get to choose exactly what you want. It doesn't matter what other people are using. And that's kind of where I'm at with the Lumix stuff, but still have to bridge the gap sometimes with Sony or Canon, depending on the shoot. And that's certainly where you would look into maybe renting something, where if you know you're going to need a particular device on a certain shoot, find out what that is and just rent it. You don't have to invest thousands of dollars just for one shoot. You can always rent, and that's a great option because there's so many easy ways to rent cameras nowadays. If you're planning in advance. If it's a last minute thing and it's just kind of like, hey, are you available? Can you show up? Then you kind of go with what you have. But regardless, I think popularity is important, but I think more importantly is sustainability. And this comes down to maybe what products exist, what content exists, how you operate, how these companies operate. The popularity contest is kind of a false game because what ends up happening is a lot of people chase that popularity, trying to be number one or to be the biggest, to be the best. And if that's the only goal you have in mind because you think the returns will be worth it, you can end up spending a whole lot to try and get there and completely fail. So let's say I were Lumix, for example. I'm a camera company. And if I'm trying to be number one, I might make choices and decisions and spend a whole lot of money that may not even get me there. What I think is far more valuable as a company and as a creator or as a person is sustainability. If I spend $10, will I get 20 back? And that's really as simple as it is. It doesn't have to be millions of dollars invested to make millions back. You see that in Hollywood all the time where they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on movies, on TV shows, hoping to make it back. And it's a big, big gamble. And oftentimes it's not sustainable. It doesn't pay off in the long run. But yet you see a lot of movies and TV shows and people working in that kind of sustainable realm where they don't have to be number one. They don't have to be the biggest. They don't have to be the best as long as they're making a return. And that's way better, way smarter. There's a lot more breathing room. You have a lot more flexibility as long as you're keeping your costs to returns, in check. So when you're buying equipment, it doesn't really matter if it's popular or not. Is it sustainable? Are you spending less than you're making? Then it's probably a good decision. But like I said, if you're spending too much, you might want to consider things like renting instead. So when I talk about popularity, ultimately I'm talking about in the lens of like to fit in. Yes, there are some decisions you have to make, but far more importantly, I'm always looking at sustainability. If I buy something, am I going to make my money back? If I'm creating something, is it going to have the return there that I'm expecting? You never want to put more time or money or energy into a project if you're not going to make it back, unless you're completely willing to lose it, in which case you can do that for artistic reasons. But I think sustainability is what keeps us all going. And not sustainability in the environmental mindset, but just sustainability in, is it a sustainable practice? Can you repeat it? Can you scale it? Can you grow it? Can you do it indefinitely and still keep going? Or are you constantly burning more than you're making? And that's where you have to really check those processes, the equipment that you're buying, the time you're spending on projects, the clients you're working with, your own practices, if you're editing, or really anything. I'm not interested in doing things just because they're popular or just because it's the way everyone else does it. I'm interested in processes, equipment, methods of making content that are sustainable, because then it means I can keep doing it. And that's a whole lot better mindset for me than hoping that I win the lottery and somehow by trying really hard and spending a lot of money, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's successful and I make it all back. Or I've seen people make the decision where they'll spend $50,000 on a camera package because in their mind they think, oh, with that level of because it's so popular. It used to be RED cameras was the big trap I saw for people who they would maybe take out a loan, or they would consider financing these really expensive purchases because maybe, fingers crossed, they would make their money back. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people that worked out just fine for. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've spent a lot on equipment and you've made all that money back and it was a worthwhile investment. But there's also a lot of people who get burned doing that and would have been better off just buying the cheaper, more starter kit package just to get things going, because it's far more sustainable than rolling the dice on a big expensive purchase, hoping to make back 2 or 3 times that investment. So when I talk about popularity, that's kind of my mindset on it. I'm far more interested in sustainability. How much can something be repeated? How much can it be scaled? Which is why I make the choices I do in almost everything. When it comes to equipment, when it comes to content production, it's all about sustainability. For me, factoring in okay, how do I make that sustainability fit in an ecosystem that's driven, marketing-wise by popularity, the glitz and the glamour and all the the sales tactics to get you to buy something or get you to want something. Yeah, you can pay attention to that, but you also have to kind of look at it and go, but can I keep doing this? Is this sustainable? And if the answer is no, I'd say look elsewhere, find a different piece of equipment, find a different process. Just because something's popular doesn't mean it's the right choice. Often it's a distraction, let's say, where it's getting a lot of your attention, but when it comes down to it, it's usually a better way that's a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more scalable, that can be with you for the long term, and it can grow and become popular. Hopefully, right? If something becomes popular, well, awesome. That's great, mission accomplished. But even if it doesn't, as long as it's sustainable, you can keep moving forward.